My name is Ken Ginsburg. I am a pediatrician at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I specialize in adolescent medicine, and I'm also the Health Services Director of Covenant House, Pennsylvania. I don't think I've ever actually practiced medicine or social service with young people without being aware that trauma was in their lives, to be honest with you. From the time that I began doing my work, which was with the Lakota Nation in South Dakota, to working with kids on the streets of New York. I think that understanding that trauma was part of their life, it was like the air you breathe. It was everywhere. But I think that the important thing to realize is that what amazed me and what drew me to this field was not that bad things happen to people. It was that bad things happen to people and that those people often have the greatest gifts to bring to the world. Some of the deepest levels of compassion, the best commitment to really repairing the world. And it was the context of strength amidst a history of trauma, whether it was personal or historical trauma, that was really what inspired me. You know, virtually every day that I'm at Covenant House, Pennsylvania, I meet young people who have had lives that would have destroyed me. And my challenge is to begin to work with them, not to see them in their state of brokenness, but to really see their sea of strengths. And, you know, when you ask me for one story, I don't have one story because I have hundreds, if not thousands of stories. And what so many of the young people have in common is having been through it in ways that truly I wouldn't have survived. And yet they have compassion despite the fact that they were shown none. They have resilience in a life that would have destroyed me. And so it's story after story after story after story of hurt people first doing what they could to escape, of people in pain self-medicating, and then finally realizing that the real answer is to reach out to other people. And when they reach, they have a lot to offer back to those who serve. The way to work with young people is not to see them in their state of brokenness. It's to listen very hard for their strengths. These young people have had most professionals in their life and most adults in their life, period, seeing them in terms of what they're doing wrong. So what I do is I sit with them and figure out what they're doing right, why I love them, why I'm on their side, and when I reflect that back to any kid, that's a starting point. That breaks that state of demoralization that paralyzes them from action. Just being seen, just really being seen by another human being is the pivotal starting point to positive change. I was taught to really understand risk. Medicine in general was a risk-based field. Focusing on people's risk, especially people who've been through it, just reinforces their demoralization, and demoralization is what paralyzes any positive change moving forward. So my career really within the field of medicine has been about shifting models to recognize people's strengths first as a starting point to change. And that matters for everybody. But for people who have been traumatized, for people who have been judged as the norm in their life, it changes everything. So I've worked originally within the American Academy of Pediatrics to create a toolkit on transforming the way we interact with young people from a risk-based to a strength-based way. And strength-based doesn't mean just looking at the positive by any means. It's an integration of understanding what we know from positive youth development, holding all kids to high expectations. It's about what we know from the resilience model, which is that it's the power of a human connection that enables a person to bounce back, and what we know from trauma-informed practices, so that we look at each human being as a whole human being instead of in their state of brokenness. You know, there's always resistance to shifting models. What we're calling for in the resilience trauma-informed practices movement is not easy. It takes time. It takes opening your heart to pain. And it's certainly much easier to just take notes, this is what's wrong, give a prescription, this is what I recommend you do. So there's always going to be resistance to a more complex model of care, always. And certainly I've seen that resistance, but not because people thought that the model was wrong, but because they needed the support to be able to do it. And the support to be able to do it certainly involves time, but it also involves the training so that you know what to do. But it also involves being able to take care of yourself. It's not easy being exposed to the most passionate themes of human existence. It's not easy. So we can't tell professionals to change if we don't tell professionals how to handle what they're going to be exposed to without it causing vicarious trauma for themselves. I think we have to speak to people's hearts and what they know. People know that seeing people as broken doesn't work. They know it in their hearts. And we have to speak to people's better selves. We have to speak to their desire to be healers, to be more than count the number of patients we see or the number of youth we see, and begin understanding or asking ourselves whether we're making a difference in their lives. And the bottom line is that asking questions doesn't really change people's lives. Telling them what to do not only doesn't change their lives, but harms them. But if we give people the tools to be able to act with people in a way that's going to build them, build their strengths, foster their resilience, and enable them ultimately to heal from their trauma, and at least not re-traumatize them, then we can make a huge difference in their lives. So what I did with about 40 other doctors, about 50 health professionals, and about 100 young people is put together a toolkit called Reaching Teens, Strength-Based Communication Strategies to Build Resilience and Support Healthy Adolescent Development. It is a comprehensive kit on all of what we know it takes to reach kids in a positive, loving way that is trauma-informed. It has 450 films. It has 69 chapters, and it's been approved from the National Association of Social Workers, the National Organization for Counselors, doctors, nurses, physicians' assistants, and health educators, all to receive up to 4 years of continuing education credit. So what this does is it allows them to, there's something out there that says, we understand that you might not know what to do. Here are some ideas. And those ideas don't come from just one person. They come from a lot of people in the field, and most importantly, from young people. Well, Sandy and I have just gone out in the last couple of weeks to figure out how much these things integrate, because the sanctuary model is really about how to change systems and how to look at yourself and how to change structures so that we don't re-traumatize people. Reaching Teens is completely synergistic to the sanctuary model. I love the sanctuary model. In fact, Sandy Bloom is the person who's written our core chapters on trauma. But what Reaching Teens is about how you sit with a young person. It's all about personal interaction, one-on-one interaction, in a way that we won't ultimately re-traumatize that young person and move them towards healing. When I think about resilience, what does it really mean? It means to be able to bounce back from difficult times. But it's more than just bouncing back. It's also about putting into place within human beings the capacity to bounce back. It starts by being a mindset. It's about how you think. It's about how you look at stress. Does stress feel like you're being attacked from a tiger? Because if so, you're never going to be able to think yourself out of a problem, because you're not going to look at the tiger and say, hey, let's work that out. This is vital to think about for our traumatized young people, because their ability to be able to distinguish what's a real tiger from what's not a real tiger in the moment is very difficult. I also think it's important that when we talk about resilience that we understand very clearly that we're not talking about invulnerability. Everybody has their limits. Furthermore, those people who have been through the most, in many ways, it's their experience of pain that brings them to be their best selves. So if I could make every young person in the world invulnerable, I wouldn't, because I want them to be compassionate and caring and committed to repairing the world. What's the bottom line of who's resilient and who's not? The bottom line is you're going to be resilient if you've had someone who believes in you unconditionally and holds you to high expectations. Ideally, that someone is your parent. When it is, we youth-serving professionals, we're additive. When it's not, we're absolutely critical. Someone is good, but it's even better if there's more than one. Even better if there are many circles around a human being who can support them. What does unconditional belief mean? It doesn't mean like it's okay to do drugs, do what you want. No, it means that what everybody needs is someone who's going to stand there, who's going to have your back, who's reliable, who's stable, who's not going anywhere. And what does high expectations mean? It's not about grades, it's not about trophies, it's not about performance. What human beings need is to be known, to be really known. And a parent's job more than anything, ideally, is to see a person from the time they're 3 or 4 years old, to really know them. And when times get tough, it's the knowledge of who that person really is, their sense of humor, their compassion, their sense of fairness, all those things we see in our children. It's that is the most protective force in young people's lives, and probably throughout their life, to know that someone saw me, valued me, cherished me. That's what really makes a young person resilient. In addition, I have a model, which is the 7 C's model of resilience, which are all the different forces that we put together in order to make someone to be resilient. In fairness, I have to tell you that the first 5 C's are stolen from the Positive Youth Development model, from Karen Pittman and Rick Little and Richard Lerner. But what's the first thing we need? We need people to be confident. And we know exactly how to make people confident, right? We just make them feel good about themselves by showering praise on them. That didn't work. Real confidence comes from a sense of competence. It comes from people noticing who you are, what you're doing well, and building on those skills. That's what really creates self-esteem, which leads to confidence. What's next? Connection. There is nothing more protective in the world to be connected to at least one person. More is better. Next, character. Having an understanding of what is right and what is wrong. We should have no worries about teaching people morality. People need to be taught morality. People want to be moral. People want to do the right thing, and that's part of our job, is to keep young people safe, but also to teach them how to contribute to the world. The next thing is contribution. Contribution matters so much. Why? Because people need to know they matter. What is happiness? It's about knowing you matter. It's not about having a cookie. It's not about having a bike. It's about knowing that you matter. But having young people who know how to contribute, it's more than just knowing you matter. It's also about taking away shame and stigma from the help-seeking process. Because you know what? Ultimately, everyone's going to need to receive, ultimately. And who's going to be able to take without shame or stigma? It's knowing that there's no pity in the room. Because the ultimate act of resilience, remember, is to turn to another human being and to say, sister, I need a hand. What allows me to reach? What allows me to reach is knowing that there's not pity on the other end. What gets me there? What gets me there is understanding that service is given from the heart, that service makes you feel good. And when I give service to another human being and learn that vital lesson, then what it means is that when I need to receive, I can do so without shame. So those are the 5 traditional C's. What I want to add is coping. Why? Because everything we fear, particularly in adolescence, but probably throughout life, whether it's sex out of the context of relationships, whether it's drugs, punching someone in the face, engaging in violence, cutting, eating disorders, everything that we fear, it makes people feel good. In the short run, it absolutely works. And telling people what not to do just doesn't get us anywhere. What we have to do is show them what to do, to build this repertoire of positive coping strategies so full that when life gets hard, and it will, people naturally go in the direction of positive strategies. And then the final piece is control. You know, you either believe that the world has happened to you, or you believe that you control your universe. And where do we learn that? We begin learning that through discipline. Did we have adults in our lives who said, you'll do what I say, why? Because I said so. Those kids feel small. Or did we have adults who said, I want you to develop. I want you to grow. My job is to make sure you're safe and responsible. My goal is to give you more and more privileges. All you have to do is earn them. When people are disciplined in that way, remember the word discipline means to teach. It doesn't mean to control. It absolutely does not mean to punish. And under no circumstances does it mean to harm. It means to teach. And when we teach people in a way that says, I got your back. You're to be safe. You're to be responsible. Now go forth. Kids become large. In the context of trauma, control is really an important thing to realize. Because people who have been through it, people who have been through the most difficult lives, they've not had control over their lives. And maybe even control over their bodies. And so what that means is that when we work with these young people, giving them back control over their lives might be the most important thing that we can do. When I think about trauma-informed practices, I think the first thing to say is that I don't separate it from what I know about resilience and what I know about positive youth development. I think it's a mistake to look at any one model and say it has all the answers. So I really try to integrate the best of what we know from positive youth development. The bottom line being, as Karen Pittman would say, problem-free is not fully prepared. It's not good enough to get a kid not to be risky. I want all of our kids to be successful 35-year-olds, 50-year-olds, and be prepared to lead us into a positive future. I also can't separate from resilience because the goal of working with people who have been traumatized, who have been through it, is to gain, to leverage the compassion that they've earned and what they bring to the table and to teach other people, but also to help everybody be able to be more likely to thrive when times do get rough. When I think specifically about trauma-informed care or trauma-informed practices, there's three main principles that I care about and that I try to teach. The first one is knowing what's about you and knowing what's not about you. So when someone is trauma-informed, they understand what traumatic experiences have done to behavior, to the brain, and therefore to behavior. So I know that a young person might be less likely to trust me, and that's hard for me. You know, I did 12 years of research on trust. It's hard for me. I know a young person or the family that they come from might be more vigilant and really always expecting me to do something wrong. I know that they might be more reactive, to just go off, and that's hard for me because I pride myself on how calm I am. I know that a person might be more likely to not tell me the truth. And that's and why? I understand that that's because if they grew up in a house where their daddy opens up the refrigerator and there's a hot dog, there are no hot dogs left, and then they say, who took the hot dogs? And they get thrown against the wall. I know that that person had to stop seeing hot dogs, but still, how can you not tell me the truth? I'm trying to get to your truth. I'm trying to get to the point where I can guide you or facilitate you to move forward. So it's so hard when people don't tell me what's truthful. And also sometimes I'll be talking to someone, especially when I get close to their truth, and there'll be confabulation. There'll be like stories that don't really seem to make sense. And why is that? It's because probably the most protective thing in their life was that when bad things were happening to them, they didn't know what was happening. They remember the Super Bowl stain on the wall and the water stain on the ceiling. They remember that, but now what happened to them? And they needed to fill in their life with a more palatable reality. But it's hard for me when I'm talking to someone and trying to know how it is that I can best serve them, and then they very quickly will begin moving in a direction that makes no sense to me. It's hard for me. And another thing is, I'm all about human connection. It's why I do this work. And sometimes the people who've been through the most are the people who are least likely to want to connect, the most likely to just zone out and to dissociate, or the ones who aren't going to give you the feedback that I thrive on. I thrive on that human feedback. And I don't always get it from people who have been traumatized. So you see how hard it is for me to do this work. I mean, sometimes people aren't going to trust me. Sometimes they're not going to be honest with me, or their stories aren't going to be whole truths, and they're going to not give me the rewards that I seek in human connection. It's really hard if I thought it was about me. So to me, the essence of being trauma-informed is to know what's about you and what's not about you. Why? because the only thing that's going to heal is our ability to love other human beings and our ability to be empathetic. And that means I have to get myself out of the way. I have to stop thinking that these behaviors are about me. They're not. To the extent they're about me, it's my ability to hold someone in their journey, to facilitate them. But the behavior isn't about me. That's point number one. And point number two, which I actually first learned from Sandy Bloom, was changing the way I look at a person. It's so easy, especially in medicine, to look at what people are doing wrong, to just see them as broken, and to change my lens to understand that these behaviors, these things that we don't like, it's because something happened to them. Changing that lens. And then the third piece, and the piece that I think I've worked my hardest to contribute to society in, is understanding that people who have been traumatized have lost control over their lives. And that anything that we do that continues to take control away from them, including telling them what to do, lecturing them, shaming them, stigmatizing them, or even just not listening to them as the experts in their own lives, anything that we do that takes away control is really, really harmful and re-traumatizing. So much of my life has been coming up with strategies to teach other youth-serving professionals how to give control back to young people. How is it that they think? How do we talk to them to honor the intelligence they do have? How do we get them to make their own decisions so that they're not top-down, imposed on decisions, taking away control, but they're young people understanding that from within themselves they have the wisdom? It's about knowing how to talk to people. It's about not lecturing, not giving them the A goes to B, which goes to C. Look at me, young man, when I'm talking to you, because if C happens, D is going to happen, then you're going to die. When we talk to people like that, they can't hear us. It's too abstract, and they might be running from the tiger. So this isn't rocket science. It's about listening to people. It's about really authentically believing that they're the experts in their lives, and it's about delivering information in the kind of concrete sound bites that allow them to figure it out when they're ready, one step at a time, so that they get it, got it, own it. Who's in charge? They're in charge. I'm blessed only to be the facilitator. So when we talk about the 7 C's of resilience, there are 2 in particular that have been damaged by trauma. The first is human connection, the most protective force in people's lives. It's been damaged. People don't trust other people, and that makes them hard to work with. But it makes it on us to be worthy of their trust, on us to be stable forces in their lives who aren't going anywhere, on us to see them as they deserve to be seen. And the other force is control. They've lost control. And anything that we do that kind of practices with a typical model that says, do this, why? Because I'm a professional, is re-traumatizing. Anything that we do that makes them understand that we know that they're the experts in their own lives because we're listening to them, and that all we are is blessed to be the facilitators in their lives as they regain control over their lives. That's being trauma-informed. Think for a minute about the behavioral change process. You know, what do we know? We know that behavioral change is a process, not an event. We know that there's forward movement and backward movement and forward movement and backward movement. And what we call progress is when the forward is more than the backward. So there are these stages of behavioral change. And then there's kind of where the stages haven't even begun. We talk about pre-contemplation, about people aren't even ready to begin thinking about moving forward. And how do people in general think we should work with someone who's pre-contemplative, they haven't thought about it yet? Well, the answer is, gosh, if they haven't thought about it, tell them. Give them information. That'll get them to think. It's missing the point. For people who've been through it, especially, it's not like I need to tell them that drugs are bad. They can teach me. I don't need to tell them about the devastation of HIV. Their uncle might have died of HIV. It's not about giving people facts. It's about understanding what is really the element that prevents people thinking about change. And the answer is it's demoralization. It's people who have absorbed messages that they're less than, that they're incapable, or maybe they've tried and they've been shut down so many times. They're demoralized. So how do I begin the behavioral change process? with love. What is love? First off, I don't use that word with young people because that word can be charged. But I work really hard to be loving. And what does loving mean? It means my heart is open and I'm really trying to figure out why I'm on that young person's side. I'm going to pay attention to things that maybe other people haven't paid attention to. I'm going to look for the young person who's compassionate despite the fact that they've been shown none. I'm going to look for the person who's resilient in the context of a life that would have destroyed me. I'm going to look for the person who grew up in a home with domestic violence and who takes out his phone and says, hey, you want to see my girlfriend? I treat her so well. And then I just have to keep my ears open, and virtually all of my kids who've been through the most, they all want to be healers. They want to be DHS workers, they want to be social workers, they want to be doctors and nurses and firemen or police officers. That's who they want to be because they want to help. And when you ask them why, it's always because I've been through it and I don't think people should continue to go through it. You know, that's what you're listening for. And when you're listening, when you find that, then you give it back to them. Rather than starting with, this is why you're broken, this is the problem, and this is why you should change, I start with, these are all the things I see about you. Pause, deep breath. But I'm feeling worried about you too. But based on all the things I see about you, I believe in your capacity to really move forward. Can we join together and come up with a plan so that it looks kind of like heart? This is what I feel. Stomach, this is why I'm worried. Brain, can we come up with a plan? Hands, how can I serve you? Love is seeing someone as they deserve to be seen, as they really are, not based on the behaviors that they sometimes have needed to display. And when people are seen, when people are known, they have a scaffolding upon which they can begin to move forward. Form a community. One of the things about people who work with young people who have been through it, young people who have been traumatized, young people who are traditionally labeled at risk, a term I reject entirely. But one of the things is that we're all very isolated. You know, we're the kind of people who go to a party, someone says, what do? You say what you do, and then someone goes, bless your heart, and then they walk away. You know, we tend to be quite isolated. And the other thing is that we tend to operate within our own silos. And each silo has a different language. You know, one of the things that professionals are very, very good at doing is creating their own set of language that makes them feel smart, than the person that they're with. And as a result, it's really hard for social workers to talk to doctors, to talk to nurses, to talk to teachers, and that's a crying shame. Because we're going to only make these changes if we make them together. So to me, I think that what has been most helpful in those communities that I've really had my deepest dives in is the collaboration. My deepest dive is in the city of Fort Worth, which is my pilot city for reaching teens, and as well as the 6 surrounding counties. Where at this point, there's about 45 youth-serving agencies that are using Reaching Teens as a template. They range from juvenile justice to the school systems to the children's hospital to the child protective services to foster agencies, just across the board. And what is amazing about what we're seeing there is that they're getting together as a community, talking about how to raise healthy kids, how to get kids from being perceived in a state of brokenness to a state of health. And what I've often said is I could go there, and I think that if they served pizza together and really I just kept my mouth closed and they never even opened my toolkit, I still think really good things would happen when we get out of our silos. When we get out of our silos and begin listening to each other, begin sharing expertise, and begin making some degree of consistency so that the young people who we serve don't have a different style when they go from agency to agency to agency to agency. If everybody is committed to resilience, to positive youth development, and to being trauma-informed, then young people will be seen as who they really are everywhere. Even better if we have the same language. Imagine if we could talk to each other. Imagine if we could do that. And that's what's happening in Fort Worth. And I think it has less to do with me and more to do with the leadership in Fort Worth, just making a really concrete decision to be committed to raising the next generation of leaders. And by the way, that's who we call our children. So in Philadelphia, I have 6 strength-based youth organizations who I'm working with really closely, all of whom have a primary commitment to understanding the power of relationships with young people as the driving force that changes their lives. And we're working really hard to create a practice model so that we can describe to other people what the scaffolding is. And what is the scaffolding? Seeing young people as the experts in their life, seeing them as they deserve to be seen as they really are, and having adults who genuinely care about kids and who don't see them as broken, and who see the potential in each young person. And so with those organizations, we are really trying to solidify a practice model so that we can help people understand how it is to best reach kids. So in Philadelphia, I've been fortunate enough to work with 6 organizations in the city. So that's Covenant House, Pennsylvania, Youth Build Philly, El Centro de Estudiantes, which is a big picture school, Wooden Boat Factory, Speak Up, as well as Students Run Philly Style. And what all these organizations have in common is a real commitment to positive youth development, resilience, and trauma-informed practices. And what they all have in common is that they're all very committed to seeing young people as they deserve to be seen, and to understand that they're the experts in their own lives and that adults are facilitators. And through the support of Joanna Berwind, and actually through the, who's integrally involved in all of the planning as well, we are thinking as a team about how it is that we can really find that secret sauce. You know, what does love mean? What's the most effective kind of strength-based relationship? So we've been exploring very deeply what this looks like, in the hope that out of this group of organizations, we'll be ready to teach the city, the region, and the country about what kind of adults produce the kind of scaffolding that young people need to be able to thrive. I would dream of a Philadelphia where we, across all youth-serving professionals, across all people in the Philadelphia area, understand what trauma does to people and are highly committed to not re-traumatize people. I dream of a city where we would be a model for the nation to break the school-to-prison pipeline, that we would look at behaviors that we so often call bad or disruptive and understand that it's people trying to cope, where we would see people and instead of getting angry at them, we would understand that something happened to them and that rather than needing a punitive response, that what they need is a higher level of support. That's what I would dream of. Because when we look at the young person who's sleeping in class, and rather than looking at that person and thinking, oh, this person doesn't care about school, maybe begin to understand that it's the first place that that young person can feel safe, and where adrenaline isn't surging through their body, and that the biggest compliment in the world to the teacher, perhaps, is that they feel safe enough to sleep. I dream of a world where we look at all children as sacred beings, where we notice that those children who aren't able to reach out to us, that those children who don't know to wipe their own noses, that those kids who can't engage us, that those kids who are angry at us are the kids who need us the most. I dream of a world in which a young black man walks towards someone who looks like me, and it's dark, and he's wearing a hoodie, and it's 45 degrees out, and he's coming closer, and the first thing that I think to do is to say good evening. That's when the world changes. The world changes when people who look like me don't hold people to low expectations. It is toxic. It is poison to healthy development when we expect the worst of other people. And I want people to know our kids. I want people to see who they really are, to see how much they bring to the world, and to be receptive to their gift, because when we see kids in that way, that's when they rise. And that's the Philadelphia I want to see.